Liam, keep the engine running, we won't be long inside. And I don't want the leather getting cold. The voice belonged to my mother-in-law. Beatrice, she didn't even look at me when she said it. She just tapped her manicured nail against the glass partition I had installed in my own SUV at their request and stepped out onto the curb. It was raining a cold, miserable November rain that slicked the streets of Chicago and made the city lights blur into streaks of red and gold. My wife, Sarah, followed her mother out of the car. She was wearing the emerald necklace I had bought her for our 3rd anniversary. She had told her friends it was a high-quality replica because she was too embarrassed to admit her husband, a struggling freelance consultant, could afford the real thing. She paused for a second. Her hand on the door handle. I waited, hoping for a look, a nod, maybe a whispered, "I love you," or "sorry about them." Instead, she leaned in. "Don't listen to the radio. Liam, it drains the battery. Just sit tight." Then she slammed the door. I watched them through the rain-streaked windshield. Beatrice, my father-in-law Richard, and my wife Sarah walking up the red carpet of the St. Regis Hotel for the Gala of Industry. Titans, they looked like royalty. They walked with the confidence of people who own the world, and tonight they were celebrating the imminent bankruptcy of Sterling Dynamics, a rival tech conglomerate that had been a thorn in Richard's side for a decade. Richard adjusted his tuxedo, laughing at something Beatrice said. They had no idea that the man sitting in the driver's seat of their SUV, wearing a suit from a thrift store and eating a cold sandwich, was Liam Sterling. They didn't know that Sterling Dynamics was my company. They didn't know that the bankruptcy they were celebrating was a trap I had spent 6 months laying out. Piece by agonizing piece, they treated me like a driver tonight. I was going to drive them off a cliff to understand why a billionaire CEO would subject himself to 5 years of humiliation. You have to understand where I came from. I wasn't born into money like Sarah. I grew up in the Rust Belt, the son of a mechanic. My father taught me that a man's worth is in his hands and his word, not his wallet. When I founded my first startup at 22, I made a promise to myself. I would never let money define my relationships. I met Sarah 5 years ago at a charity run. I was there anonymously. Just a guy in running shorts and a faded t-shirt. She was charming, funny, and seemed down to earth. She complained about the rich snobs organizing the event. It felt like a breath of fresh air when she asked what I did. I told her the truth, but a watered-down version. I consult for tech companies, I said. It pays the bills, but it's inconsistent. It wasn't a lie. I did consult. I just happened to consult for the board of directors of a Fortune 500 company I owned. We fell in love fast, but as things got serious, I noticed a shadow looming over her. Her parents, the Maxwells. They were old money, the kind of family that looked at your shoes before they looked at your eyes. When I met them, Richard asked me 2 questions. What university did you attend? And what is your 5-year liquidity projection? I told him I went to a state school and that I preferred not to discuss money. He scoffed. That sound that dry, dismissive scoff became the soundtrack of my marriage. Sarah defended me. At first she told them I was kind, that I listened to her, that I made her happy, but water dripping on a stone eventually wears it down. The Maxwells were a waterfall of toxicity. He's nice, Sarah, but he's not ambitious. Beatrice would whisper loudly at Sunday brunch. Look at him, he's wearing a watch that ticks. Digital is for children, analog is for men, but a quartz movement? That's for the help. I could have bought the watch factory. I could have bought the Swiss town the factory was in, but I stayed silent. I wanted to be loved for me, not my portfolio. I proposed to Sarah with a modest ring, a family heirloom from my grandmother. It wasn't flashy, but it was real gold and a real diamond. When Sarah saw it, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, just a twitch. It's quaint, she said. That was the first crack in the foundation. We got married. I moved into the apartment Sarah's parents bought for her. They insisted on keeping it in her name for tax purposes, which was code for in case she dumps the loser. Slowly, the dynamic shifted because I worked remotely. Managing a global empire from a laptop requires discretion. They assumed I was unemployed or barely scraping by. I paid for groceries, utilities, and our vacations, but I did it quietly. I never flashed cash. When Richard's manufacturing business hit a snag 2 years into our marriage, he started cutting costs. One of those costs was his private driver. Liam isn't doing anything during the day. Richard said during a family dinner I had cooked. He can drive us to the club. It gives him something productive to do. I expected Sarah to object to say, "My husband is not your chauffeur." Instead, she looked at her pasta and said, "It would help Dad out." "Liam, you have so much free time." That stung, but I agreed. I told myself it was a way to bond with my father-in-law. I was wrong. It wasn't bonding. It was servitude. It started with rides to the country club. Then it was picking up Beatrice's dry cleaning. Then it was waiting outside restaurants while they had family business meetings that I wasn't invited. Toy became invisible. I was the furniture, and because I was invisible, they stopped filtering their conversations around me 6 months ago. I was driving them to a vineyard upstate. I had the partition down. Richard was on the phone with his CFO. "We need to crush them." "Mike," Richard shouted, "Sterling Dynamics is bidding on the government contract. If they get it, we're finished. We need leverage." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. He was talking about my company. Beatrice chimed in from the back seat. "What about that leverage you found?" "The supply chain issue?" "It's not enough," Richard growled. "We need to bankrupt them from the inside. We need a mole, or we need to sabotage their liquidity." I looked in the rear-view mirror. Sarah was reading a magazine, completely ignoring her parents plotting corporate sabotage, or so I thought. "Daddy," Sarah said, flipping a page, "why don't you just use the shell company? Buy up their debt when they leverage for the new expansion, then call it in all at once?" My blood ran cold. My wife, my sweet, innocent Sarah, who supposedly hated her parents' ruthless business tactics, was giving them advice on how to destroy me. "That's my girl." Richard beamed. "That's exactly what we're going to do. We'll bleed Sterling dry." I almost swerved off the road. I had been planning an expansion. I was leveraging debt to finance a new R&D facility. It was public knowledge in the industry. Sarah knew about finance. She worked in marketing. But she had an MBA. She knew exactly what she was suggesting that night, lying in bed next to her. I asked a simple question. "Sarah, how was the ride today?" "Your dad seems stressed." She rolled over, her back to me. "Just business stuff." "Liam, you wouldn't understand. It's complicated." "I might understand," I pressed. "I know a bit about business." She let out a sigh. "The kind you give a toddler who asks why the sky is blue." "Liam, please, you manage spreadsheets for startups. My father moves millions. Just go to sleep, and don't forget you need to wash the car tomorrow. It's muddy." That was the moment the husband died. And the CEO woke up. For the last 6 months, I played the part of the fool perfectly. I drove them to their meetings with lawyers. I drove them to the bank. I listened to every single word they said. I learned that Richard was over-leveraging his own company, Maxwell Corp., to buy up what he thought was Sterling Dynamics' bad debt. He was pouring every liquid asset he had into this attack. He mortgaged his properties. He dipped into the pension funds. He was going all in. What he didn't know was that the bad debt he was buying was being sold to him by another shell company. Mine. I was selling him his own demise. And he was thanking me for the ride to the bank, but the emotional toll was heavier than the financial one. The disrespect escalated. Last week was my birthday. They forgot all of them, even Sarah, instead of a dinner. Richard called me at 6 p.m. "Liam, bring the car around. We're going to Le Monde. We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" I asked, foolishly hoping they were surprising me. "The acquisition." Richard gloated. "We've cornered Sterling. We're triggering the bankruptcy clause next week. We're going to be billionaires." "Liam, real billionaires. Maybe I'll even buy you a new suit." I drove them to Le Monde. I sat in the parking lot for 3 hours eating a protein bar while they drank vintage wine. When they came out, Sarah was stumbling a bit. "Oh, Liam," she giggled, tapping on the window. "You're such a good sport. Dad says maybe we can hire a real driver soon so you can, I don't know, find a hobby." I smiled a shark smile. "I have a hobby. Sarah, you'll see." That brings us back to tonight, the Gala the Reina. I watched the clock on the dashboard, 8:15 p.m. The main event was starting. Inside, Richard was scheduled to give a speech about innovation and integrity. The irony was suffocating. My phone buzzed. It was my VP of Operations. Marcus text. "The trap is sprung. The acquisition documents Richard signed last week. The counter clause just activated. Maxwell Corp. is now technically a subsidiary of Sterling Dynamics. We own them. Liam, all of it. The house, the cars, the company." I'd texted back. Text. "Is he aware yet?" Marcus. Not yet. The notification hits his phone. In 5 minutes. You ready to make an entrance? Me. I'm already here. I turned off the engine. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I took off the chauffeur's cap. Richard made me wear a ridiculous thing he bought online as a joke. I reached into the glove compartment, but not for a tire gauge. I pulled out a small velvet box. Inside were my platinum cufflinks and my real watch, a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. I slipped the watch onto my wrist. I swapped the cheap plastic buttons of my thrift store jacket for the platinum links. I stepped out of the car. The valet rushed over. Sir, you can't park here. This is for guests. He stopped when he saw the watch. He stopped when he saw the way I stood. Keep it running, I said, tossing him $100 bill. I won't be long. I walked up the red carpet. The security guard at the door held up a hand. Invitation? I don't need one, I said calmly. I'm the guest of honor. Name? Sterling, Liam Sterling. The guard checked his list. His eyes widened. He tapped his earpiece. Dispatch. We have Mr. Sterling is here. Yes, the owner. He stepped aside and opened the heavy oak doors. The ballroom was warm and smelled of expensive perfume and roasted duck. Hundreds of heads were turned toward the stage where Richard was standing at the podium, holding a microphone. Sarah and Beatrice were standing just behind him, beaming with pride. And so, Richard bellowed, his voice booming through the speakers, we have proven that strength and cunning always win. We have eliminated the competition. Applause rippled through the room. I started walking down the center aisle. My wet shoes squeaked slightly on the marble, but no one heard it over the clapping. In fact, Richard continued, I have just received word that the acquisition is complete. He pulled his phone from his pocket to check the confirmation email. He was expecting a message saying Sterling Dynamics has filed for Chapter 11. I stopped 10 feet from the stage. I watched Richard's face. He unlocked his phone. He tapped the screen. His smile froze. Then it twitched. His face went from flushed red to a sickly, pale gray. He squinted, shaking his head as if the words on the screen would change if he looked harder. Beatrice leaned in. Richard, what is it? Read it to them. Richard looked up. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes wild and unfocused. Then his eyes locked on me standing in the center aisle. Wet hair, cheap suit, $1 million watch. The microphone slipped from his hand. It hit the floor with a deafening screech of feedback that silenced the entire room. You, Richard whispered. But the room was so quiet, everyone heard it. Sarah stepped forward, looking confused. She followed her father's gaze and saw me. Liam? What are you doing inside? I told you to wait in the... Read the email, Richard. I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. My voice carried the weight of 5 years of silence. Richard's hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped the phone. It says Maxwell Corp has been acquired by Sterling Dynamics due to default on secured loans. A gasp went through the room. That's impossible, Beatrice shrieked. We bought their debt. No, Beatrice, I said, taking another step forward. You bought my debt, which I sold to you. You leveraged your company to pay me cash, and you used your company as collateral. Who are you? Richard rasped, looking at me like I was a ghost. I walked up the stairs to the stage. I took the spare microphone from the stand. I turned to my wife. Sarah looked at me, terrified. She looked at my shoes, then up to my face, and finally her eyes landed on the Patek Philippe on my wrist. She gasped, covering her mouth. She knew what that watch cost. I'm the man you treated like a driver. I said to the room, I'm the husband you treated like an accessory. I turned to Richard, and I am the CEO you planned to bankrupt. I reached into my jacket pocket. I believe you have something of mine. I said, my company, my dignity, and I pulled out a white envelope, the same type of envelope they used to slide my allowance across the table. And I have something for you. I slid the envelope across the podium toward him. This is an eviction notice. I said, for the apartment Sarah lives in, for this building, which I bought this morning, and for the car waiting outside. Richard looked at the envelope. He looked at me. Liam. Wait, Sarah stammered, reaching for my arm. Her eyes were full of tears, not of sadness, but of panic. Baby, please, it was just business. You know I love you, right? I didn't know. I looked at her hand on my sleeve, then I looked at her eyes. You knew enough to tell them how to hurt me. I said. I pulled my arm away. Now, I pointed to the exit. Go fetch the car, it's raining. And I don't want my leather getting cold. The silence In the ballroom didn't last, it broke with the sound of a camera shutter, then another, then a flood of flashes. The press, who Richard had invited to document his triumph, were now documenting his execution. Security. Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking. Remove this man, he's an imposter. He's our driver. Two large security guards stepped forward. They looked at Beatrice, then at Richard, who was clutching the podium for balance, and finally at me. They didn't move toward me, they moved toward the Maxwells. I'm sorry, Mrs. Maxwell, the head of security said, his voice flat. Mr. Sterling is the owner of this building as of 9 a.m. This morning. He signs our paychecks now. You do not. This is insane, Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She looked at her friends in the crowd, seeking an ally. Everyone looked away. The social elite of Chicago smell blood in the water faster than sharks. And tonight the Maxwells were bleeding out. It's not insane, Sarah, I said, my voice calm, amplified through the speakers. It's business. Your father taught me that kill or be killed. Isn't that the family motto? Richard finally spoke. He looked old in the span of 5 minutes. He had aged 20 years. Liam, the shares, the voting rights, you can't have them all. I have protections. You had protections? I corrected him, but you waived them when you used your class of stock as collateral for the loan you defaulted on 10 minutes ago. I own 51% of Maxwell Corp. I am removing you as CEO, effective immediately. I turned to the crowd. Please, enjoy the dinner. The open bar is on me, but the previous hosts, I gestured to the trembling family, need to leave. They have a lot of packing to do, as the security guards gently but firmly took Richard and Beatrice by the elbows. Sarah tried one last desperate move. She lunged forward, grabbing my lapels. Liam, stop this. I'm your wife. You can't evict your wife. I gently peeled her fingers off my suit. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow. Sarah, I suggest you find a good one, though. Since your father just lost the family retainer, you might have to settle for a public defender. I walked past her, down the stairs, and out the side exit. I didn't look back the next morning. At the Sterling Dynamics headquarters, a glass tower that looked down on the city, I sat at the head of the long conference table. My assistant, Marcus, opened the door. They're here, Sir Richard, Beatrice and Sarah walked in. They looked like they hadn't slept. Richard was wearing a wrinkled shirt. Beatrice looked small. Sarah wouldn't meet my eyes. They sat at the far end of the table. Let's make this quick, I said, sliding 3 thick folders across the mahogany surface. Folder A is the transfer of assets. Richard. Beatrice, you are signing over the deed to the lake house, the city apartment, and the liquidating the offshore accounts to cover the remaining debt. If we sign, Richard croaked. What do we get? You get to stay out of prison, I replied. I found the irregularities in your tax filings. Richard, I can hand them to the IRS, or we can settle this civilly, your choice. He signed. He didn't even read it. Folder B. I continued. Sarah, this is for you. She opened it. Divorce papers. She looked up, her eyes pleading. Liam, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I didn't know the extent of it, I swear. You knew enough to suggest the shell company strategy. I said coldly. I heard you in the car. Sarah, bleed him dry. That was your phrase. You didn't just marry me? You were complicit in trying to destroy the only thing I built with my own hands. I was trying to impress him, she whispered, looking at her father. Well, you impressed me too, I said. Sign the papers. You get nothing, no alimony. The prenup you forced me to sign? The one your father drafted to protect your assets? It protects mine too. It states that in the event of infidelity or malicious intent, the spouse forfeits all claims. I never cheated on you. She protested. Financial infidelity, I said, and conspiracy to commit corporate sabotage. It holds up in court. Sign it, or we go to trial and I air every dirty secret this family has. She signed. The pen shook in her hand so violently it tore the paper. And finally, I said, standing up, the keys. I held out my hand. Richard placed the keys to the Bentley in my palm. Sarah placed the keys to the apartment. You have 24 hours to vacate the properties. I told them, whatever isn't moved by noon tomorrow will be donated to charity. Where will we go? Beatrice whimpered, we have no money. Liam, you've taken everything. I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline. I hear they're hiring drivers at the rideshare company downtown. I said without turning around, Richard has experience and… Sarah, you're good at marketing. I'm sure someone needs a sign spinner. Get out. The divorce was finalized in record time. The scandal destroyed the Maxwell name. No one in the city would do business with Richard. He ended up moving to a small apartment in the suburbs. Living off Social Security, Sarah tried to contact me a few times, drunk voicemails at 2 a.m. Crying, then screaming, then begging. I never listened past the first 3 seconds. I blocked the number and changed mine. I focused on the company we integrated. Maxwell Corp's assets. We saved the jobs of the innocent employees. Richard was going to fire. Sterling Dynamics became the industry leader, not because we were ruthless, but because we were smart. But the biggest change wasn't the money. It was the freedom. 6 months later, it was raining again. I was sitting in the back of my new car, Rolls-Royce Phantom, but this time I wasn't driving. I had hired a professional driver, a young man named David, who was working 2 jobs to support his sick mother. I paid him triple the market rate and gave him full benefits. We were stopped at a red light near the bus station. I looked out the window. Standing at the bus stop, huddled under a broken umbrella, was a woman. Her blonde hair was frizzy and wet. She was wearing a coat that looked 2 sizes too big, probably from a thrift store. It was Sarah. She was holding a plastic grocery bag, looking at her phone, waiting for the bus. She looked tired, hardened. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the dull exhaustion of survival. My driver, David, noticed me looking. "Do you know her, sir?" he asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Do you want me to stop?" I watched her for a moment longer. I remembered the way she slammed the car door in my face. I remembered the way she laughed when her father called me useless. I remembered the driver partition she made me install. "No," I said, pressing the button to raise the privacy partition. "I don't know her." The light turned green. "Drive on, David. We have a future to get to." The car glided forward, leaving the bus stop, the rain, and the past behind in the mist.